How are you?
Welcome everyone. If you want to just put yourselves on mute, we're going to get started in just a minute. I'm waiting to see, waiting for more people to join us. We will get started in just a few minutes. And if everyone can just maybe put a quick note in the chat box to let me know if you can hear me, that would be great. I've got to just go take a quick look at the chat box while I'm here. Here we go. Yeah, just let me know if you can hear me, if you can see my screen. I want to make sure everything's working properly. Marina, I don't know if I'm saying you're, yeah, you can hear me, Banu, great. Okay, great, awesome. Okay, good. All right. There we go. I'm gonna hide that for now. Okay. And I'm not sure what you all can see. I just want to make sure you can see my slides. If there's anything in the way, just pop something into the chat. When I get going in my presentation, I don't look at the chat. So if there's anything, sometimes on my last webinar, I forgot to share my screen at one point and somebody just popped in and said, can you share your screen? So if something urgent comes up, feel free to just unmute yourself. And we'll get started. Whoever is about to join us in a little bit will hop on as we go through this. And I'm so glad you all are here tonight. Tonight here on the East Coast and maybe over in Europe and the rest of the country afternoon, Sunday afternoon. So welcome. I'm Elizabeth Dankoski, and this is the Dream School Path. I'm the founder of the Dream School Project, and today we're going to be talking about how to create and express the story that will get you in. And really, this is all about how to help you and your students stand out in the admissions process, particularly for those who are rising seniors and about to enter the admissions process. So let me go through this. So this is for students. Whoops, I'm in the wrong. I had a feeling something was going on here. Let me switch over. Let me stop sharing for 1 second. I had notes from the wrong place set up. Hold on 1 second. Let me get that for you. Okay. Sometimes the technical piece of this can be tricky. Thanks for bearing with me. Okay. Seems as if I have lost my notes at this moment. Okay. There we go. Now I can share this with you. Okay, let's try that one more time. All right, we're gonna go find where Keynote is in my, there we go. Okay, now I'm in the correct slides. All right. No, I'm sorry, my technology is not cooperating. Let me get the right slides up for you. I don't know why that's doing that. Let me try that one more time. What we'll do is we'll just close this. And there we go. Okay. And we'll try that again. Okay, so let me just, can you tell me whether you can see the right slides? This should be who this training is for. This is for rising seniors and their families. And for some reason, it wanted to keep showing me slides from another presentation. Let me just check the chat box here and make sure that it's all, yes, right slides. Awesome. Thanks, you all. Thanks for your patience. Okay, so, and let me go into my full screen. Okay, so So this training is this one in particular. I'm letting you know that I have 2 trainings this month. There's one tonight, and then there's one in 2 weeks. This one tonight is particularly for rising seniors and their families, because I'm sure you're wondering about the admissions process, what to think about this summer, how to prepare for the fall, how to craft amazing essays and prepare for the interviews and all of that. We're going to cover all of that today. In 2 weeks, I'm running another seminar that is focused on students who are in younger grades, 8th, 9th, 10th, even juniors, and what they can start to be doing to think about how to stand out and navigate their whole summer, this summer and ahead. So if you have younger students and you want to know about that, I'll be sending out that information later this week. Or feel free to email me. I'll be giving you my email at the end. And then for tonight, we're just going to focus on seniors and what they need to focus on, rising seniors, juniors who are just finishing up their year. So today, this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the 3 the college admissions process. And there's 3 specific components that I really want to emphasize today about what rising seniors can be thinking about this summer and then all the way through the fall as they work on their applications. We'll talk about what's next, the opportunity if you want to work with me, and then we'll definitely have some time for a Q&A. We're going to be together for about an hour and a half, and so I'll be talking for about an hour. If there's anything urgent during that hour, just hop on and let me know if there's something I'm missing that you need. Otherwise, we'll have an opportunity to move into Q&A at the end. Great, so we'll get started. So as I mentioned at the start, this is the Dream School project, and particularly we're focused on the admissions process. And I'm the founder and the CEO of the Dream School project, which is a mentoring program for high school students that is intended to help them create a project that showcases their unique interests and serves their communities in a really meaningful way. And as a result, students end up standing out so much more in the admissions process because they're honing their unique form of leadership. And we'll talk about what leadership is in a little bit, but I wanted to just give you a quick overview. So my students have been accepted into all of the nation's top schools: Harvard, MIT, Columbia, Dartmouth, etc. And 100% of my students are accepted into the top 40 schools. 75% of rising seniors who come to me, this time are accepted into the top 20 schools. When students come and work with me earlier for any kind of mentoring or college consulting, that number goes up depending on how early they're working with me. So I'd love to ask you all, do you know what it takes to get accepted into a top tier school? Maybe you can just put some things into the chat. I'm really curious to hear what, let me get out of full screen mode just for a moment. And I'm just gonna go into the chat box and I'd love to see, what are your thoughts? What does it take to get into a top? I know there's a lot of advice out there about, get the top grades, the top SAT scores, and high-level extracurriculars, all of that. Is there anything else you would add to that? Anything that really feels important?
Will this work on that?
Sure. And I know you're just joining now, and if you can just keep yourselves on mute, that will help us with, there we go. Does anyone want to jump in and add something? You can unmute yourself. You can put something in the chat box. Let's see. Might take a minute. Tammy, I love your driving in your car. That's awesome. Welcome. We're always multitasking, aren't we? All right. Well, I see that maybe many of you, like Tammy, are driving in your car and can't really. Okay. Juliana came in. Leadership and skill spike, like sports. Okay. Yeah. And thank you for that, Juliana. Leadership is really important. But what I wanted to say about leadership is that it's not what a lot of people think it is. A lot of people say that leadership is about, the positions that you have, the head of the club or captain of this team or that team, or starting a nonprofit or something like that. Leadership is particularly when we're thinking about the admissions process, is really this opportunity for students to express what they're interested in and how it makes a difference for others around them in some way. It could be an online community, it could be their school, it could be their um, local community or cultural center. Um, the idea is that leadership is truly, it's not really about the title. It's much more about what are you interested in and what are you bringing out into the world. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute, because there is still, even though we've got rising seniors on the call and parents of rising seniors, and you might think, well, there's not much I can do at this point. Actually, you can still create something really interesting this summer and all the way through next year. And that I'll talk about how that can support you in your admissions process. So let me go back to our notes and hopefully my technology will cooperate. Okay, yes, very good. So let me go into here. So one of the things that I thought for a long time was that straight A's and perfect SAT scores and high level extracurriculars and beautiful essays, that combination was really what students needed for the admissions process. I'll talk in a minute about my background, but I was self-taught about the admissions process. It was very much a learn as you go. And so I read the books, and probably a lot of what you all have been introduced to and told, and that's the advice that I gave to my students for a long time. But I realized as I worked more and more with my students that actually it's not true. Straight A's and perfect SAT scores aren't the thing that gets the students into their dream schools. So let me tell you a little bit about how I got into this field. This was my first TEDx talk back in 2016. And uh, basically what happened was, when I was a student at Wellesley College, one of the families nearby wanted a really good writing tutor, an English tutor for their, I think he was an 8-year-old kid at the time. He was doing high school level math, went on to go into college when he was 14. So it was really sort of off the charts intellectually, but they wanted somebody to come in and round out his language art skills. And so we just started playing together with writing and language, and we had so much fun. And then the mom loved what I was doing with her son, and she told all her friends. And then by the time I was finished with Wellesley, I had this full roster of students. I was teaching writing and I was teaching the SAT. And then after Wellesley, I went and got my master's in creative nonfiction writing, which is in essence memoir, personal essay. And so it was very natural for students, after they were done with their SAT prep, to come and say, hey, can you help me with my essays? And I loved it. I loved getting to know the students' stories. And I realized, oh, this is what I really want to do. And so I focused on the admissions process and on the essays. And like I said, I read the books and thought I knew what I needed to know for all of this. And then about 10 years ago, I had this huge class of students, about 18 different seniors who were all applying to the top schools. And they had amazing grades and test scores. And I helped them with all of their essays. And they just had everything that I thought that they needed. And I was so excited for the admissions results to come out that spring. And to my amazement, what ended up happening was, those students who had looked so amazing in their applications, in my opinion, remember I was self-taught, only 2 of those students got into the really top schools. So Harvard and MIT, Columbia too. And I was really flabbergasted. I couldn't figure out what was happening, why they all looked amazing to me. So what was the difference? So I started to look at it really closely, because I was worrying a lot about my students' stress level. They were getting so little sleep and coming to me just really exhausted and overwhelmed and stressed about their admissions process. And so I was worried about them in that way. And then on top of it, then they were mostly getting waitlist letters. They weren't even getting rejected. They were just getting waitlist letters. Well, I realized after, studying this more, talking to a lot of people, I realized, oh, this isn't about, what the resume says or their activity sheet or how beautiful their essays are. The difference between the students who got in and those who got waitlisted was that those students who got in had a specific project that they had gone on to create of their own. So they didn't just necessarily plug into the clubs and the teams and the sports and music and all the stuff that students do. They were doing those things, but in addition, they were doing something different, something that wasn't just something they could join or head up at their school. In other words, it was really showcasing what they were interested in. And that got me thinking, because I thought, well, if I can teach students how to create a project that showcases their unique interest and really serves their communities in a meaningful way, what will happen? Their stress levels will go down because they're doing more of what they love and they're interested in, and they're going to end up standing out. And so it was this win-win. Their stress levels going down and doing better in the admissions process. And so that's how I came to create the Dream School project. And as I went through it, I realized that colleges are deeply interested in student stories of how they've developed their creativity. So this is something that I started to focus on more and more and more. And I ended up creating this now year-long program called the Dream School Project Mastermind. And it's to do exactly that, help students create those projects, help students create those stories, right? Because we know when it comes to the admissions process, it's not just about do you have good stories and a good resume. It's how do you really showcase who you are and what your contributions are. And it's so interesting. I've just had a huge number of interviews with previous students. Last Sunday, I did a 2-hour panel with some of my previous students who are now in college or even post-college. And then I also have been interviewing all of my seniors who are at the end of their senior year now and went through the admissions process with me last fall. And everyone talked about when I asked them, to talk about the admissions process, what they remembered, what it was like for them. They talked about how the stories that we ended up talking about often were stories that they didn't think were important. And those were the stories that really tipped the balance in their favor. So what we end up doing in the process and what students want to do, if they're just going to say, I'm going to go for this and I'm going to really take this, all of this advice we're talking about today, I'm going to go do this on my own. What you really want to do is focus on this idea of where your creativity, where your unique form of leadership is shining through and the impact that you've made. And it doesn't have to be in the way that we traditionally think, like the tutoring that many students do, or the different captainships, or heads of clubs or whatever. It doesn't even the essays don't have to be about those things, though there can be components of that. What we really want to show is these unique stories about creativity and leadership, as well as the supplemental essays are often an opportunity to show more personal stories, a more personal side that's not necessarily connected to leadership. So what we're seeing is that the colleges are looking for students who reflect today's innovation era. And that's something that I had to learn the hard way years ago, and my students had to learn the hard way. And now that when that becomes the focus, it is incredible to see what happens in the admissions process and how students end up standing out. And I'm going to take you through a number of examples of students who have done this with me. So when we talk about innovation and leadership, they're basically one and the same, right? So for example, when we talk about leadership, it could be that the student is, say, a member of his math team, right? And I had this actually happen with a student a number of years ago, where he came to me halfway through junior year and didn't know how to stand out. And so he was obviously very busy, didn't have time to create a brand new project. So what we ended up doing was asking, well, what do you really love? He talked a lot about math team, knew he wanted to be a mathematics professor. And what he ended up doing was bringing a higher level of innovation and creativity to the math team. So he noticed that the team was really kind of, not very unified, not very cohesive. And he thought that the lectures were kind of boring, and that there were these three distinct groups that never really interacted. There was the one group of the kids who competed all the time, there was the kids who competed some of the time, and then there were the kids who showed up once a week for something to do. And he wanted to have a more sense of team building and connection, and so he set out to do that. And then, of course, by the end of junior year, his advisor, who was overseeing the club or the team, said, "I'd like to nominate you, to be head of the team next year." And so we ended up writing about that, and he wrote about a number of other things not connected to that, that really showed him as a deep thinker and as a leader in his unique way. And I love that story because it's not that he had to go, cure world hunger or start a nonprofit or do something radically earth-shattering out in the larger world. He just needed to show that he was awake to what was interesting to him. And I'll tell you in a minute about a story of a student who did a mini summer project last year, who came to me as a rising senior, wanted to stand out, and we ended up creating a mini summer project together. So that's something that's also part of innovation and leadership, is where are the opportunities for students to innovate, to lead in ways that are not traditional necessarily. So and this is what we were talking about, perfect grades and test scores. It's this story of creativity and innovation that is so much more important than perfect grades and test scores. In fact, for those of you with younger students, and I'll be talking about this a lot more in depth in a couple of weeks, perfect grades and test scores can actually backfire, because students end up spending so much time on grades and test scores that they don't have time to do a project, to do something that will really distinguish them from everybody else. And that was what made me realize, when I had all of those students, 10, 12 years ago, and they all looked amazing to me, I realized, oh, when you're at a certain level of high achieving student, if you put that next to everybody else, they look average, right? So what are we going to do? And that seems cruel for these students, right, who are working so hard and getting not very much sleep and really like high levels of commitment and work. It seems cruel to say, I'm sorry, it's not enough, which is basically what the waitlist status is. It's basically saying you have everything that we say that you should have, but it's not quite enough. We don't really know what makes you different. And so this story of how you're standing out, where your creativity is showing up, that's really what matters here in this in the admissions process for seniors at this point. So this is what students want to do, is to show what they love and how they're using this passion to help others. And that's something that you can also still be creating this summer and into next year as well. So let's look at these three secrets. So secret number one is this idea of creating the best college list for you, for the student, right? Through out of the box college research. Now, I didn't understand, it took me a while to understand that if you don't have the right list, and you've got, say, a top heavy list of applying to all the Ivies or all the top 20s or something like that, but you haven't really done the research to find out what is a really good fit for you, then it doesn't matter how beautiful your essays are, how well you do in the interview process. None of the rest of the application is going to matter if you don't have the right list. And a lot of people are relying on US World and News Report for rankings to figure out, well, where should I apply? But the truth is that we can't rely on US News and World Report. I did a huge breakdown of trying to understand what those rankings were a number of years ago. And it basically is a moneymaker for US News and World Report, no surprise there. But what's interesting is when you break down what all the different parameters of what goes into the rankings, you'll find that it's primarily the amount of money that a school has, the acceptance rates, as in how many students they can turn away, and like those two things are the primary. There's actually nothing in there that talks about the quality of the education. So it's really interesting to look at what the rankings are doing. But of course, they've been elevated to this place in a society where we look to them as if they can tell us where we're going to get an amazing education for our kids. What we need to do instead is something very different. We need to do out of the box college research. If we have time, I'd love to take you at the end, maybe in the Q&A section, to take you, share my screen with you and take you through how I would start researching a school. Because it's really different from just, you go to the homepage, you look at sort of the basic statistics, and then of course most students go right to the academics and where they, what major they might want to choose. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's only the very beginning of this. I'm going to share a story in a little bit about a student who got into Pitzer, which was definitely a reach school for her. She got in early decision last year. And one of the key things that we did together was intensive research. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But what you want to do is not just kind of skate around the website a little bit and think, oh, okay, that looks fine. You want to get to know this as deep, these particular schools, and so you can create the right list for yourself as deeply as you possibly can. It's a big job to do this, right? We don't do it quickly, which is why I love to get going with my students, say now, right? End of school year. So we're not at the beginning of September trying to scramble to do the research and the essays, but instead we've got a nice amount of time over the summer to do a lot of deep research. And I'll say that to be fully transparent, my area of expertise is in the essays, the college, the mentorship component, and then the admissions interviewing. So my specialty is not in creating the list itself. I can certainly comment on it based on my years of experience, but I don't have explicit training in that area. And so I always recommend, and I have two very good colleagues that I can refer you to, but I always recommend that you have a professional help you with that list. Particularly the more high achieving a student is, the more important having the right fit is in that list, because the high achieving students, of course, are going to be applying to the really top schools. And what we're seeing with admissions is, of course, the rankings are dropping lower and lower and lower. We know that this year the admissions rates for regular decision are all in the single digits, except for Cornell, which is 10.8%. So because the admissions rates are so tiny right now, we don't want to waste anyone's time just saying, oh, I'm just going to apply to all the Ivies or all the top 20. That's not a good approach. It's incredibly overwhelming to have to write that many essays. And it's not actually strategic. So what we want is a strategic approach. And a huge piece of this is through really interesting out of the box college research. So you could do things like, look at what the president or the chancellor of the school is doing. What are his or her projects? And has this leader had any kind of podcasts or, any kind of videos out there where we can get a sense of who this person is at the helm of this organization, because that will tell you a lot about what the ethos of this place is and what really, whether that matches with what your student is really interested in. So that's secret number one. Secret number two, this is about creating an unusual summer project. I mentioned this earlier. So basically what happens is so many students get to me, they've gone through the intensity of junior year. And of course, we just had a very strange academic year with COVID happening and most students not in school in person, but trying to keep up online. And there have been tremendous challenges with that. Most of the students I've been working with have just been incredibly overwhelmed by the amount of work that's come along with their COVID learning experience, and haven't necessarily had time to work on a project outside of just keeping up with academics. So if that's the case for your student, one of the things that you can be doing, even if, say, there's the traditional summer programs in place or an internship, a couple of things. One is you still have an opportunity to use any extra time that you have to create some kind of project that really is interesting to you. Or in the case of the student that I mentioned who did the math team, the work with the math team, he didn't go create a brand new project. He worked with within what he was already doing. And that is also a possibility. So say your student has an internship this summer, one of the things that we can think about is how can that student bring a higher level of participation, innovation, contribution to that organization, to that experience, so that it's not just a sort of passive showing up and I dutifully, do what I'm asked, but it's more, okay, what are the needs around me? What and where am I really feeling excited about what I could contribute with my skills and my interests? So that's a particularly important component of that, and that's something that I can help students with. I did this with one student last summer. He came to me at the beginning of his post junior year summer, and he wasn't sure exactly what he was interested in. He had done a lot of science team, and he was thinking about biology. And then I don't know exactly how we developed it, just through the course of a lot of conversation at the very beginning of the summer. He ended up deciding that he was really interested in exploring the idea of what would happen if he got outside into the natural world more often. Would he start to feel a deeper sense of connection to the natural world? And in turn, would he then feel even more passionate about climate change and sustainability? And so he decided that he was going to do this informal research study with himself and his family and a number of family friends and neighbors, where he invited them to get outside every day for a walk, and then to record kind of what they noticed in as the weeks unfolded. Now, it wasn't an official research experiment, so he wasn't paying his participants. So there wasn't necessarily a huge amount of follow through on it, except he followed through, and he found that the more he was outside, because he was coming out of the end of that COVID spring of sophomore year, and he had barely been out. I think he hadn't stepped outside literally for weeks. So he had been in his home for something like 3 weeks, hadn't been outside at all the whole time because he was busy studying for finals. And when he finally went back out, it was forming a whole new relationship with the natural world. And he got really curious about it. And he started reading about the neuroscience of forest bathing. That's what the Japanese call it, when you're out in the forest. And we did a lot of scholarly reading and research, even as he was also doing this very experiential, hands-on experiment to see what it would be like for himself and for his family and friends. And he ended up writing a really beautiful essay about, how all of this played out for him. And when I interviewed him about a month ago or so to ask him, what was that like for you? What stood out? He said it made such a difference for him in terms of thinking about majors. For example, he had gone and thinking he would just be a biology major, but now he was thinking about neuroscience. And it's that, and the connection and how neuroscience plays out in relationship to climate and sustainability. So it was a very creative, interesting, different kind of experience that not only helped him in the admissions process, but also helped him personally with thinking about, well, what do I want to study in college? And of course, college is, where it's meant to be a place to experiment and try things out and change. So we don't know if he'll stick with that necessarily, but he felt more expansive. He felt like he had more opportunities and possibilities opening up for him. And then secret number 3 is let your own stories surprise you. So if we've got, really amazing college research to help you create that college list, and you're doing something really interesting and innovative over the summer, then the third piece, of course, is to start writing the essays. But so often students don't think that their stories necessarily matter. I'm going to take you through a whole bunch of examples of specific stories about this in a minute. But so many times my students have said to me recently, I never knew that was important. So for example, there was a student who he really interested in fashion, and he was also a big skateboarder, but he was also really advanced in computer science, and he also loved to make digital music. So he had a whole lot of things going on. He was not a straight A student in any way. You can imagine, with all those interests, he wasn't putting every minute into his academics. So he wasn't straight A, but he ended up getting into really some extraordinary schools with single digit acceptance rates. And a huge piece of that was being willing to tell stories that he didn't think were necessarily important. So a lot of times what we need is we need someone to sit down with us, someone who's neutral. So not our parents, not our siblings, not our best friend, someone who doesn't know you super well, to sit down and ask with a totally fresh mind and a sort of blank slate, to ask lots of questions and help you discover your stories in the process. When you do that, you end up creating a whole picture of who you are and of what you really want to communicate to the admissions office about what you have to contribute to their campus. And so many students think, well, they just want to know about, my academic accomplishments. No, they want to know you holistically. Right. And so we want to let those stories really surprise just even yourself, because if you're surprised by your stories, imagine what it's going to be like to read them when it comes to submitting them to the admissions officers. So let me go through and take you through some really interesting stories from previous students. This is Brandon. He graduated from MIT a few years ago, and he was interning at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. But the reason he even got into MIT was that I think it was December of his senior year, he had just gotten waitlisted at Cornell, which was his top choice school then. And he and his dad came to me and they said, well, what can we do for the regular decision piece? Because we're kind of worried about this. And I said, well, let me take a look at your essay. So I took a look. It was beautifully written. He was a very lyrical, poetic writer. And at the same time that it was beautiful, it wasn't telling me anything necessarily new. So he had talked about how he had created this app to keep track of the change, because his position at the farmers market was to handle the change for all the vendors. And so he ended up creating this app, so he didn't have to juggle all these coins and try to remember what went where. Instead, he created it to easily give people their change. But the issue was that when I looked at his activity sheet, I could see he was in robotics. I could see that he had been volunteering at the farmers market. And I said to him, let's tell a more personal story, something that really shows us who you are, aside from what we can already see in your grades and your activity sheet. And so we talked together, and in just 45 minutes, this beautiful story came out about how when he was starting high school, he decided he wanted to try some new clubs, and he decided to try the debate team. And it was a really bad fit. He wasn't someone who spoke quickly on his feet. He wasn't extroverted. He didn't think of himself as terribly argumentative or good at winning arguments, but he didn't want to quit. And so he stuck with it for the year, but he was always standing at the back, kind of watching the room and wondering where he should fit in. So the next year, sophomore year, he decided he would try robotics. And the first day he walked in, everybody was getting ready for a competition, but somebody handed him a screwdriver and said, hey, you want to see what we're doing? Let's dive into this together. And so he loved that. He loved the collaboration. He loved it so much that he went on to become captain of his robotics team. But that wasn't the story. The story was that he never forgot what it was like to be that kid at the back of the room watching everybody. So he was always turning around and watching for the kids who felt left out, like, hey, what do you guys think? And do you want me to explain anything? And I said to him, wait a minute, you have to tell that story, because what's the stereotype of an engineer? You're applying to Cornell School of Engineering. The stereotype of an engineer is what? Someone who doesn't really notice other people around him because he's so interested in his work, right? Or her work. And so I said, tell that story, because that's a really important, information. So what he did is he ended up sending that new essay. We wrote this brand new essay. He sent it to Cornell in the form of a letter saying, I thought a lot about what I wanted to say, and this is what I really wanted to communicate. And then he also used it in his regular decision applications. And he ended up getting into Cornell and also to MIT. and of course ended up going to MIT. And I love that story because it illustrates just how important expressing the right story is. And it was something that surprised him. He didn't think that that was even a story to tell. It didn't seem like it mattered, or it wasn't as important or impressive as building an app. But it ended up showcasing his unique personality, and what a benefit it would be to have somebody like that who's so aware and compassionate towards other people in an engineering setting. So that's Brandon's story. And then Sierra's story. So I worked with Sierra 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago. She was a student at Northeastern, so that she was a transfer student, and she has a passion for computer science, and she's got this deeply analytical mind. And she found that at Northeastern, which has this amazing co-op program, that the focus at Northeastern was really about um, the hands-on experience. What do you do with your learning? And what she was craving was more the theory. She just loves the theory. It's so fascinating to her. And she didn't want to go jumping into creating into action until she was ready, had all the theory under her belt. So when she did her first round of applications, she was on my college panel last week, and one of the things she said was that she started writing the essays. She felt pretty good about them. She's not a natural writer because she's got this mathematical, computing mind instead. But she felt pretty good about them. And then what happened is her mom kind of swooped in and said, "Oh, we got to change it up," and basically sort of rewrote the essays. And so she ended up submitting those essays, but didn't feel good about them, and then felt like she didn't really get a chance to stand out in the admissions process the way she wanted. And so she wanted an opportunity to try this again in her own way. And so she found me, and we worked together, and I asked just a lot of questions to find out about who she was in all the different parts of her life. And she ended up being accepted into Cornell last year. And so she just finished her first year there. So her junior year there. So she's now a rising senior in her college experience. And even though it's been COVID, and she hasn't been able to go to classes in person, she still has been so happy with the experience of being able to get that theory that she really wanted. And maybe more important, she loved her essays. She felt like they really reflected her. They were her unique stories. And it also contained things like she loves to ballroom dance. And she didn't necessarily know whether that was important to talk about. And I said, absolutely, we've got to show all of you, and not just someone who's passionate about computing and coding and building apps and all of that, but let's show you in your whole life, what is it that makes you joyful and connected. And she was ballroom dancing was very important to her. She was one of the lead teachers, which is a huge role of responsibility in running the club. And now she's thriving at Cornell and getting the education that she really wanted. And that's so much to do with her story, right? Because what was the difference between the first round of admissions applications that she submitted and the second? It was really, the difference was her story. And now, of course, she'd had 2 more years in college, but her grades hadn't radically changed in any way. And so it was really the story that was helping her stand out and get that education she wanted. Oh yeah, and let's talk about Luca. So Luca, this is actually connected to the student I was talking about before with William, and how he created that. So sometimes I change my students' names. So this is Luca, but William was the student I mentioned before. So William, Luca, same student. He created this this unified sort of team bonding experience for his math team. And then he went and took that same idea of so post junior year, when he had grown up in China, and then was here in the US for his high school, but went back to China during the summers. And he ended up taking that idea and bringing it back to China, and using some of these lectures and this kind of interactive experience with younger students. He was also a philosophy student, read a lot of philosophy, and was really passionate about that. But when he was on my student panel last week, one of the things that he talked about was how the deep conversations that we had in the process of discussing, who he was, what he was interested in, what he wanted to create during his junior year and into his senior year, he ended up um, saying that he got so clear about why pure mathematics, because a lot of students, it's natural to want to move towards applied mathematics because it's tangible, it's experiential. You can, kind of wrap your mind around what is it and how do I use it. But for him, pure mathematics was the total joy, and that was partly connected to his fascination with philosophy. And so, and he's now, he was so motivated and inspired by his experience of getting so clear about pure mathematics through our conversations, that he ended up knowing, even as a sophomore in college, who he wanted to study with for his PhD. And he was so motivated to do that he finished his undergraduate in 3 years. He finished his graduate degree in 1 year, and he's graduating now from his graduate program after 4 years. And he's already in touch with the PhD our professors that he wants to study with. And he said, it was so interesting to see how many students just sort of fell into pure mathematics just because they didn't know what else to choose. They didn't know why they were choosing it, other than that they were just, it was sort of, that was the thing they were good at. But other than that, they didn't know what they wanted to do with it or why. And he felt like, with getting so much clarity, that was what gave him so much fuel and energy to just leap through the whole process, so that now it's within 4 years, he's already getting his master's degree and ready to do his PhD. It's really exciting. Okay, Malia, yeah, so this is the student who got into Pitzer early decision. She was not a straight A student either. She was a strong student. Her school didn't really do GPA, so we kind of had to cobble it together. It was something like a 3.75 out of 4.0. So she was a strong student, but not perfect grades. And she had also had tremendous challenges throughout high school that was part of what impacted her grades, dealing with ADHD. And she was an artist, and it was really hard for her to try to navigate the intensity of her academic demands. She was in a very, very demanding school. And on top of dealing with ADHD and some very intense depression, she had a lot to navigate. So when we started working together at the end of her junior year, we talked a lot about, okay, so what are we going to do to create? What are we going to do to help you stand out? She did a lot around, she was in the DC area. So last year around this time, there was a lot happening, of course, with the protests around the Black Lives Movement. And as an artist, she started putting up posters and, advocating where she could. But she didn't have time to do a whole, huge big project, of course. So we spent a lot of time focused on the essays and on the interview preparation. And she was just incredible at the research. We researched so much together. After we discovered Pitzer, we researched it pretty deeply, and she got so excited about it, not just for its academics, but actually a lot more about the rest of what they were doing on the campus. It was the first school to divest from companies that had any holdings in petroleum-based companies. It was hugely focused on racial justice, and was very transparent about, and as a young East Asian woman, this was important to her. And we had a lot of deep conversations about what this whole conversation around race and racial justice was like for her. And I would ask her questions that she would say, I don't know, I haven't thought about this before. And then she'd go think about it, and she'd come back, and I'd take tons of notes. And then I'd say, great, I think this is what you're trying to say. And she would say, yes, that's it. Thank you for helping me find the language. And so that was a very collaborative process. But the piece about Pitzer was, we wrote this beautiful essay together. It was the supplemental essay. I think it was a 650-word essay. And it was basically something like, if you could create anything at Pitzer, any kind of event, what would it be and why? And so she wrote this beautiful story about it. And then she had, this is also an important piece, she had formed a relationship with the admissions officer for her area. And she actually ended up showing him the supplemental essay, and he said, it looks great, but add in something specific about Pitzer, like why Pitzer? What is it that you want, you know, to do on this particular campus? And so we ended up going back and doing, you know, hours more research, and we probably only added in something like 3 sentences. It wasn't a big piece of the essay, but it was enough to show that she had done deep research. And in fact, when she went into the interview, we did a lot of prep for that too, and a lot of research. She had researched some stuff that the interviewer himself, who was a faculty member there, didn't even know. So that showed the level of research, and that piece of how much she just fell in love with the school, and then expressed that to them. That is what made the difference, because Pitzer is extremely selective. Their regular decision acceptance rate is something around 14%. Our early decision, of course, it jumps up much higher, and something about like around 34%. But even still, it wasn't a shoo-in for her. She didn't have any SAT scores either, right? So she didn't have the traditional application, because, you know, a lot of schools were test optional last year, and she was struggling with the testing. And so I said, let's just take it off the table. We knew it was a gamble, but it actually worked in her favor, because she was able to do such deep research and show the college how much it was a good fit, and she was a good fit for them, that's what tipped the balance in her favor. And I actually have a beautiful interview with her where she talks about this. We talked together last December after she got her news, and she talks a lot about the interview, or the research process. And if anyone would like to see that, I'm happy to share that with you. Just let me know. And then here's Jack. So Jack is one of the students I mentioned before, where he was really interested in fashion and computer science, and he was a skateboarder, is a skateboarder, loves to make digital music. And he was not a straight A student, right? Because he's doing all these things that he just loves and is so passionate about. And school was like, you know, he did well, but it wasn't like, I think it was like a 3.6 out of 4.0. So we weren't, his sister had gone to Dartmouth. I worked with his sister to help her apply and get into Dartmouth. But she had much higher grades than he did. And so we knew it was going to be a big challenge. So one of the things that we did was we just dug and dug and dug to find the right stories. And when we talked together last week, I finally was able to get him on the phone and do an interview, a sort of exit interview of how did it all go? How are you feeling about the whole process? And he ended up getting into, I'm blanking on some of the names of the schools, Claremont McKenna, Bodwin, and one other that I'm blanking on at the moment. But these are all schools that have extremely low acceptance rates, under 10%. And once he started to get some of those results, he didn't get into Dartmouth, he didn't get into MIT or Caltech, some of the schools he'd really been hoping for, but he ended up getting into Claremont McKenna and deciding to go there. They have an amazing consortium with the other colleges in that area, and can cross-register a number of them. And it ended up just being a great fit for him. But it was the combination of doing deep research to make sure we really had the right list for him, because we couldn't, sometimes students think, I'll just use the same list my sibling, did. She did all the research, I'll just do that. We don't want to do that, because we got to do the research specifically for this student who's in front of us, and their unique interests, and where they are academically too, which isn't necessarily where their sibling or their best friend is. And so, that was one of the things he talked about last week. He said, again, just like many of the students have said, all the questions you asked me helped me realize what my story was and what mattered. And I didn't know that those things mattered. I thought they weren't important or the schools wouldn't care. But we ended up writing so many interesting essays about his interest in street fashion and how that was connected to his entrepreneurial mind. And we talked about skateboarding and how it was such an incredibly bonding and bonded community. and all of the other. And then he had an incredible story about his family. His grandmother calls them her United Nations children, because they have literally family from all over the world and so many different cultures and nationalities. It's fascinating. And all of that produced this set of applications that helped him stand out in a way that would have, if we'd had the wrong list, for example, if we'd had a very top heavy sort of traditional list, he may not have done as well. But we did this, he did this deep research into each school to find out, was it a good fit? And then we made sure that the essays really matched that as well. And that's what helped him stand out. And then, oh, this is a really beautiful story. So this is Alana's story. This is the last story I'll tell about the examples of students. She, this is a little bit different situation. She had had a very severe illness, some kind of tumor in her femur. And she'd had multiple operations, and she kept getting this really difficult news. A lot of her high school years was spent in the hospital or recovering from surgery or in rehab. And it was just really, it was a very painful thing. And then so we did all the applications together, and I helped her find her stories, and it was so delightful to work with her. She just really shone in a lot of ways. Her love for music, all the playlists she makes for her friends and family, she's known for her playlists, and that's a way to really bring people together through music, isn't it? And her love for the beach, and a number of other things. And when I talked with her last week, we finally had a chance to come together and talk. She said, I had heard from her mom that she was doing great and that she'd gotten amazing news, the first piece of good news in almost 4 years from her doctor. And I asked her, I said, so tell me, how did working on these applications help you? How did it impact you, even outside of the admissions process? She ended up she's wanting to become a nurse based on her early experience, and she ended up getting into FSU, which isn't one of the most highly ranked schools, but was a good match for her. But the piece that she said to me was, I think I'm finally healing now because the work we did together helped me completely see myself completely differently and help me see myself holistically, so I could see the whole of who I am, and not just myself as someone who's trying to get through an illness, or someone who's been on crutches or in surgeries. And I got chills hearing that, because to hear that the admissions process, right, the conversations that we had around helping her find the right stories, that was the piece that helped her finally start to heal. And so I don't think she has to have any more surgeries. At least that's what the doctors are saying at the moment. That was really powerful to hear. And that's what I'll say about what it's like when I work with my students on their essays. It is so much deeper than the admissions process. I mean, of course, we're doing it for admissions, right? But what ends up happening, and students have told me this over and over again, is students come to know their own stories in a way they never imagined. And so they, like Alana, it's like this celebration of who they are. And even just like one student wrote a story about how, waking up and having to drink his mom's fresh green vegetable juice every morning and kind of gagging it down, and how that illustrated. And then we used it as a sort of springboard to illustrate that how he did it, even though he was kind of gagging it down, he was so cheerful moving through it, and that's his way of being in the world. And all of these things, they seem like, well, why would colleges care if I'm drinking green vegetable juice, right? But it's the meaning we make of it, right? And it's not just for the admissions officers, it's for the students themselves to be able to see, oh, this is who I am. This is what I'm celebrating. This is what I have to bring into college. And that's incredibly empowering, so that when they're going into college, they're not just getting in, they're there to thrive and to see themselves as someone who has the power to make a difference in other people's lives, who has the power to create and innovate and lead in their own unique way. That is really what, if you've got the right support for the admissions essays, that's what it should do. Not just get the student into their whatever their top choice school is, but really help them be in a place of deep celebration. So that tells you a little bit about some of my students. I'm happy to talk more, answer your questions. In fact, let me stop sharing. And what I'd love to do is have an opportunity. Whoops, let me just get out of there. I'd love to have an opportunity to answer your questions, talk more about whatever feels important to you. And you're welcome to unmute yourself. You're also welcome to put anything in the chat. I'll give you a few minutes to think about your questions and put them in for us. More examples of projects. Absolutely, Juliana, I can. So in fact, you know what I'll do? I'll tell you some examples now, but I have a recording that I made for some of my students last summer when I was starting a new version of my mastermind program that has a range of examples for students of different student projects. One of my favorite stories is about a student who a few years ago, he came to me, I think it was in the fall of his junior year, so kind of a few months into junior year. He was a student he was strong student, maybe a 3.75 kind of student out of 4.0, and already had a perfect ACT score. Now, when you have a perfect, SAT or ACT score and the grades aren't exactly matching that, it can be a signal to the admissions officers, hey, this kid is not, living up to his full potential. How come he can do so well on the standardized test, but his grades aren't as strong? What's going on? Is he not applying himself? What's happening? So he was worried about it. And he was worried about how he was going to really stand out because he didn't have hadn't found what he was really interested in. And in fact, when we started to work together, he said, I tried everything. Nothing's really interesting. I don't think I'm going to find anything. So we talked together and we worked together for a couple of months. And there we go. So we talked every time I would come, those first couple of months, every time we'd come together, we would try out something for the week and he'd come back and say, oh, that's not it. I don't really like it. It's not interesting. And so I was committed and I kept asking him questions. And finally one day he said, I think I like to cook. I said, oh my gosh, great. And I had a friend who was a chef in the area. He was up in the Boston area. And he started taking lessons, started going to the farmers markets, talking to the vendors. He got really interested in the farm to table movement. And so we went to a farm in his town and they had a restaurant there and started talking to the restaurant owners and the farmers and got just so passionate about it, but really just started cooking for his family and his friends. And when it came time to do the admissions essays at the end of his junior year, he was certain that that was not enough because we had talked at one point, could he create a food festival at his school? What could he do with this interest? And he never really got anything huge off the ground. But I said, he said, it's not going to be enough. He was going in as pre-med. He didn't have any traditional research, pre-med research. And he was just not confident that he was going to do well. And I said, just use the essays to show why, because he thought maybe he would become a physician, why cooking is in paying special attention to textures and tastes and flavors and sourcing your food and all of that, all the details of that and bringing family together. Why is that going to make you an amazing physician? He wrote the essays about it and he ended up getting into UCLA, which was a super reach school for him. And he was certain that he was not going to do well in the admissions process because he didn't think the project was big enough. So I love that example because it's not so daunting. It's not like, you have to go create something massive. Another student created, have any of you heard of Humans of New York? This is a photographer in New York who 10, 12 years ago, lost his job and didn't know what to do. So started wandering around the streets of New York and taking photos of whoever he saw, and gradually started asking really interesting questions. And it's become a phenomenon. There's, millions of people follow him, and he now travels around the world when it's not COVID to illustrate. He was in Rwanda last year, and he's been to Syria, and going to areas of the world where there's a lot of bias and prejudice towards that country or those people, and it's become something that there's a lot of offshoots of this. So one student ended up creating a Humans of Weston for his high school. He was incredibly introverted, and it was very difficult for him at the beginning to go and interview people and ask for interviews, because he was really shy. So we worked a lot with that. We also he was very interested in design. In fact, he was on my student panel last week, and he had done a lot with design and is now really interested in going to major in design, graphic design. And we did a lot with that, helped him get an internship post junior year using design thinking skills and graphic design skills. There are so many examples that I could give you, and what I'll do is just send you that recording, and then if we have time, I'll also tell you more, but this gives you just a little flavor of some of the things that students have done. I'm getting another question. How should we approach the deep research you discussed? My school counselor recommended looking at the common data set for particular schools, but are there any tips for finding more information about student life and the sort of environment at particular schools? Yes, this is a great question. Thank you for this. So let's see what the other questions are. If we don't have a ton of questions, I think people are just sort of taking in information tonight. We might not have a ton of questions, and if we have time, let's just go and look at it. Maybe you can message me a school in particular that you're looking at. You want to start to research. We'll go and look at it together, and I'll show you how I research. But the basic thing is, there's a couple of resources. One is, of course, the websites themselves, but sometimes the websites aren't great. Like their main page and sort of the marketing brochure component of the website is great usually, but the individual academic departments are sometimes really not very informative. They're not marketing. They're just like, these are the courses you have to take, and these are the professors. And so you have to do deeper research. So I am a fan for judiciously using College Confidential. Let me just go ahead and put that into the chat. Let me make sure I'm sending this to everybody. So College Confidential, you have to be careful with this because it can make you a little bit crazy sometimes. It's a lot of students coming together and talking about what are my chances of getting into Stanford or, whatever school. But there's a lot of information about specific departments at specific schools or specific programs or internship opportunities or summer programs, and I like it in that way for getting deeper research. You have to take it with a grain of salt, because these are students who we know that when people post online, we're sort of getting the extremes. People who love something and want to share and talk about it, people who don't like it or really had not a great experience. So we don't want to get too take it all too seriously, but it can be a starting point. I also like to use, say, Facebook is off. Sometimes these different departments have special pages for their departments, and sometimes they're active, often they're not, but that can be a good place. And then of course, going and calling the admissions office, seeing if there's a possibility to talk to current students. There are also some companies out there that are really good at connecting students with current students or previous students for a nominal fee. I think it's like $25 sometimes, at least some of when I last looked at it, that was their pricing was around that. And so you can go and talk to a student who's there. That's the best way to do this. When you also want to go visit the campuses if possible. And the best time to visit a campus isn't in the summer, because you can see the beauty of the campus if it's beautiful. But you can't get a feel for what it's really like, because summer is completely different. Most of the students are not there. They're traveling or doing research, and there's a lot of summer programs going on. So the best time to go is usually on your, say, February or April, if you have those, or February, March, April breaks. if you're in a school that has a break during March, like a longer March break, you want to check to see if you can get in when it's not corresponding with that school's March break as well. Because you can be in there, attending a class, getting to actually experience. Let me just go in and see where we need to mute. There we go. Let's see. I think we got it. Okay. Oops. If you're not muted, do you mind just muting yourself just because we're having a little background noise? There we go. Okay, so what was I talking about? I lost my place. Research, college research. So you want to try to visit. If you can't, though, I mean, COVID has forced so much to be online, right? So you could always do some of the virtual tours. That said, it's nothing replaces in-person experience, right? So sometimes you can't, it's just logistically not possible, COVID or not, to get to the campuses and see them in person for yourself. So in that case, that's where talking to current students, and that's where going and doing things like listening to podcasts from the leadership team, if there's some of those available, trying to go outside of what the college is the obvious, research on the college website is doing, and being as innovative and creative and thinking outside the box as possible. Does that help? I think this is for Yilan. Yeah, Yilan, if you want to tell me a specific school that you want to look at, I'm happy to share my screen and we could go through and check it out, or we'll just choose a school and have fun, looking at it. And also, if you want to tell me what particular major you're considering, we can go and look at those specific pages as well. What other questions do you have? Oh, another question. How important are awards? Well, awards are a piece, just like they're a piece, like grades and test scores are a piece. Grades and test scores are the things that get you in the door, right? But they're not what tips the balance in your favor. Honors are the same thing. They're a piece of it, but they're not, like, for example, the student who, did the cooking for his family and friends, he didn't have any awards. He had very few extracurriculars. His grades were okay, but not stellar. So if you have awards, fantastic. But what I say about grades, test scores, awards is make sure you're keeping it in balance so that you're not overworking, because one award or two awards or multiple awards, unless they're at an extremely high level, like a national level or international level, they're not going to be the thing that tips the balance, right? It's going to just be a component of it. So don't worry if you're getting awards. That's great. But also don't spend all your time trying to get awards, because it's easier, more efficient with your time, more fun, and much more likely to succeed if you focus on your own project and creating something. Say, if you're a rising senior over the summer, that's really interesting to you. That's going to go so much farther, because guess what? That's saying to the colleges, I know what I'm interested in, and I want to make a difference, and I'm doing it now. And the thing I want to say about projects is you don't have to have them finished. It's not like you need to have it all tied in a bow at the end. It could just be that you started, right? Because that shows I'm awake to what's interesting to me and I want to make a difference, and I'm awake to that. Yeah. Okay, let's see. And I'm just seeing what Elon is saying. That's helpful. I'm not sure of majors, but I'm interested in pre-law, and schools include Barnard, Emory, and USC. Fantastic. Well, does anyone have a particular desire to see Barnard, Emory, or USC? Any preference here? Because otherwise I'll just go right to Barnard. Yeah. Let's do that. And feel free to keep putting questions in the chat as you think of them. I'm going to go to Barnard. And I'll share my screen with you in just a moment. Okay. So if you can't, I can't see the chat when I'm in share screen. So if you can't see it for some reason, just unmute yourself and let me know, and we'll see what tech issues we need to address. So here we are on the Barnard's homepage. The first thing that I do is I go over here. Let's just see what they're doing with Boldly Barnard, because I actually researched this with one of my students, the student who got into Pitzer. I researched this with her. So it's going to take you into a video. Obviously, you'll want to watch this. It's just going to be sort of a promo video, right? It's not going to have huge amounts of content, but it's going to give you a feeling for what matters here. What we know about Barnard is that it's a women's college, and there are incredible alumni associated with Barnard. And so they've got Jhumpa Lahiri here. So she's a very famous East Asian author, and she graduated back at the end of the 80s, and they've got a note from her. So we just pay attention, like, okay, what are they featuring? I was exploring, and a college like Barnard is so wonderful for that. There are all of these other worlds right around the corner or on the other floor of the building. So what we're seeing right away is they're saying, hey, we're someone who helps young women explore the world in a way that is just exciting and full of adventure. And then the women leading the way. So we know right away, that's the whole focus of this particular area of the website. So then they would talk about the achievers. I would go in here and look, who are the achievers? What are the women who have led the way, right? So they've got, obviously you can scroll through here. I'm not going to read all of this now, but what you want to do is, it takes to research a school really well, takes about 4 or 5 hours for each school. Some schools are faster because their websites are, not great, but you want to dig. So you'd want to read that article and then go read other articles like it, because you're not reading so much for trying to memorize the information. You're trying to get a feel for what matters to this institute and how does that resonate with what matters to me. So if we go back to Boldly Barnard, we go to the college and its mission. So I would scroll down, it devoted to empowering young women to pursue their passions. And then it's quite a lengthy mission statement, isn't it? But you would go through and read this. And what I do is I in a separate document, a Google Doc, I will, make the list of the colleges we're researching. And then I'll go up here and I'll copy this link and I'll put it under, have a section on Barnard, right? And I'll say like mission statement, and then I'll put the link to that. You want to save every link that seems important to you, because you can be 50 clicks deep into the website and you're not going to be able to recreate that easily, and it will save you a lot of time. It also helps get really clear when it goes to write the essay about why do you want to go here. You really want to make sure that you've got that research quickly and easily available. So I would pay attention. I'm not going to read this out loud right now because it's lengthy, but I would pay attention to what are they emphasizing. So I'm just looking in like intellectual resources, professionally satisfying lives, successful, personally fulfilling. So these are the kinds of words, and take whatever language feels really important or interesting to you and copy and paste that or write it into your document. Let's see what else they're doing here. So we've got knowledge and action. So we go through and it's talking, okay, encouraging sustainable food practices, beautiful. And if you're interested in that or that's important for you, you go read more about that. These are the kinds of things. Now, if I remember correctly, it might change this year. Sometimes the supplemental essays change, but if I remember, they had a short 250-word supplemental essay last year. And so you can't fit everything in here, but it doesn't matter. You're not researching for your essay at the beginning. You're researching just for you to find out what's a good fit for you, and where do you go, oh my God, that's cool. I want to find out more about that. That's amazing that they do that. Because what you want is every time you get excited by what you're seeing with the school, that's where you're starting to find the right fit. Now, this is only a component of what the right fit is, but it's important, right? Because you're going to spend 4 years here. You want to love what they stand for, right? And you want to make sure it fits you. They've got a living history, and you can read about that. Connecting with the community. So this is really important. They've got this virtual concert, the Harmony series that they did in COVID, and how did they navigate COVID? Down here, recycling clothes for climate action. So you're seeing research, you're seeing some of the examples of the kinds of things of how they take their knowledge and put it into action. And this is something I would really highlight for yourself. Oh, wow, I love how they're taking what they're studying in the classrooms and bringing it into the world, because how many times do we get to do that in high school? Not very often, right? And so that when a school is really emphasizing that this is what they're doing, that's exciting. And it also it shows you that how to move into college in a way that's different from high school. High school tends to be a very passive experience for a lot of students because you're so used to being told, sit down, be quiet, memorize, give it back to me, and then do it all over again. But there's not a chance to take that knowledge for the most part and apply it, right? And so the focus becomes grades. Whereas now, when you're entering college or university, you want to find out, what are these colleges doing? What are these universities doing to help me take my knowledge and put it into action? So they're emphasizing this here, and I would absolutely talk about that. I would emphasize that for sure. So we've got the mission statement. Let me go back. Okay, so and then you see other things like the whole self. So this is a very cool program that the president has integrated. I think she's a neuroscientist, and you can read about that, about how she's bringing neuroscience to create, really well-adjusted, happy students, so that that the focus is not just how are you doing academically, but how are you doing holistically. And that's, if that feels like, oh, that matters to me, which I imagine does to a lot of students, then talk about that. Yeah, and then obviously they talk about New York City, partnering with Columbia. That's of course something that you can mention, but when you're writing these, why do you want to go here, research-based essays, you don't want to talk about the stuff that's obvious necessarily. I mean, you can mention it, but don't talk about things like the study abroad program unless it's radically different from everybody else's, because most colleges have a study abroad program. You don't necessarily need to talk about the things that are most obvious or well known about a program. You might just say, for example, even though Barnard is so well known for its partnership with Columbia University, actually for me, the reason I'm applying is because of da 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 da, right? So you could always acknowledge it, but you don't want to spend a lot of real estate in your essay, particularly if you only have 250 words. You don't want to waste that. You want it to be so laser sharp and focused on what it is you want. Does that make sense? Then obviously you can look at their history, the college leadership. Let's go look at that. So we're going to get to see, so President Belak, she's a cognitive scientist. And this is where you would go deeper into understanding who she is, what it is she really wants to bring to the campus. And then you'd look and go check and see, has she done, talks? Has she done podcasts? Like, get to know the voices personally, because that is what makes your research pop. And you can't hide that. When you've got that kind of connection and excitement about a program or about a school, that will shine through in your essays. If you've just sort of done quick cursory research and you don't really have a deep connection, you're not that excited, you're applying because of the name, that's going to come through. It will be maybe a well-written essay and have all the right facts, but it won't have that spark to it. So this is the kind of research that's the deeper spark. All right, now let's go look at there's a lot more we could do there, but let's go look at, just gonna grab some water. Academics. So what I'm trying to find is where let's just find out where their academic options are. Sometimes you have to click around for a while. So it's going to talk about the foundation of their curriculum, right? So that's basically their core curriculum in some way. They talk holistically about that here, which is great. And then majors and minors. So let's go. So for this particular student who was messaging me privately, she was thinking about, I'm sorry if I am saying your name wrong, but thinking about doing pre-law, right? So in that case, pre-law is often, we do things like sociology or anthropology. Sometimes it like often in the humanities, right? In some way, comparative literature. economics. So there's a whole bunch of things that are possibilities here. Let's just say, I'm skimming here to see what all the different, even neuroscience and behavior, right? Let's just go look at that for a minute. We'll click on to go see the what they've got here. So right away, we know that they're sort of welcoming us into this. Sometimes you'll click on a page and it will just have a list of all the requisites, prerequisites you need to graduate. And this one is taking time to basically say, this is who we are and this is why we do this. So offers learning opportunities that provides a strong background in the biological underpinnings of behavior and cognition. Barnard students electing the neuroscience and behavior major are offered introductory and advanced courses, as well as the possibility of taking courses in other disciplines, psychology, biology, etc. Learn to think analytically, how to conduct research. This guide provides an overview of the department. So we would go click on that. Let's see what it wants us to download. So we won't do that at the moment. But what we would do is we'd go up and we'd read about the major, and then we'd read maybe a little bit about the senior thesis. A lot of colleges and departments have senior thesis, so this isn't necessarily something, unless it's really unusual, that you need to talk about. But what I would do here is go and look at the people, go and look at the faculty who are here, read about what they're doing and what's interesting to you. And it can take a while, especially in these larger departments. Sometimes there's 20, 30, 40 faculty. Obviously, you may not research deeply every single one of them, but you're looking for the people that you go, oh, that's really cool. I would love to learn from that person. I would love to do some kind of internship with them, or I'd love to take their courses. Does that make sense? So we spend a lot of time doing that. Let's go back to Barnard's main page, and then look at beyond Barnard. What are they saying about the alumni? How, like, there's alumni stories and data and outcomes. Over here, they should have, it's probably the college and its mission over, let me just go here. Because they have, you can click on that and it has more information. It will have some statistics about, what their students do, where they're from, all of that. So that was a very quick version of how I do deep research, but let me know if that's helpful or if you want more information, but that kind of gives you a sense of just how I would start to approach it. Great, okay. So any other questions for me at this time? We're almost to the end of our time here. I think what I'll do is just go ahead and share with you. So I have just a few spots left to work with students for admissions this summer into the fall. And what I'd love to do is just show you how you can get in touch with me. Let me just share my screen with you. There we go. And what we'll do is, oh, wrong one. Let me go over here. Okay, so play. Great. So you can go to, if you wanted to find out what it's like, we could just have a conversation together. I just need some background information. So here's a quick and easy application that just gives me some basic information about where your high school is, what your GPA is, what major you're thinking about, what schools you're thinking of applying to, all of that, just some basic background information. And then what I'll do is I'll set up, I'll send you an email and we'll set up, I'll give you my calendar, we'll find a time that works and we'll talk. If you book a call in the next 48 hours, I'm going to be doing something a little bit new. I'm going to be offering 2 additional supplemental essays to work with your application. So that would, usually what happens is you can do, I usually work with students on their top 6 schools, so the supplements for the top 6. So if we did 2 more, you'd have enough for 8, probably 8 schools. Sometimes like Chicago is, has so many essays, right? So, but what happens is when we do schools that have a lot of essays, we can reuse them. And when you've done your top 6 schools, you can take all of the essays. At that point, you've done a lot of writing. Take them and use them for your schools that are not as important, and you just rework them to make sure you're answering the questions. I'm also going to be sending out an exclusive collection of essays from my recent students, so you can see it's not just the personal statements, but how do they do the supplemental essays, because there's a whole range of those. And in addition, for all of you here tonight, I would love to share with you this 2-hour panel that I did with my students last week. Obviously, you don't have to sit down for 2 hours and watch it. You could just watch it in bits as you have time, but it's incredibly useful. I asked them lots of questions about how to, like, what the admissions process was like, what they wish they had known at the, when they were in freshmen in high school, what they wish they'd known before they entered college, what college has been like for them. It's incredibly informative. And we had 5 different students come together. We were able to get all 6 of us in one time, which was a major feat. And I'd love to share that with all of you as a thank you for being here with me tonight. I'll grab this link and, oops, and let me just stop sharing. And then I will put that in the chat. And if anyone has, oops, if anyone has questions for me, feel free to email me. What I'm going to do is put my, you should have my email already, but just in case, you can reach out to me at info@elizabethdankoski.com. Tomorrow, I'll be sending the replay of this along with this 2-hour panel, just for those of you who are here live. If you would like to set up a call with me, just go ahead and fill out that. Let me get that link for you again. I meant to do it and it's not letting me do it. Let me grab it. And are there any questions before we go? Anything that you'd like to ask me about?
Elizabeth, the last time you went to screen share, were you supposed to be showing us something other than the homepage of Barnard?
Oh, it wasn't working? Oh my gosh, I clicked through so many. I'm so sorry. I don't know why that didn't work. I clicked through so many different parts of the website, and I'll check the recording to see if for some reason it showed up on my end and not on yours. And if it didn't, let me see if I can somehow recreate that in some way.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you all so much. Other questions? Anything else you'd like to ask me about, talk to me about? Okay, well, you've got my email. You'll be hearing from me tomorrow. And I so look forward to connecting with anyone who wants to speak to me in person. We usually talk for about an hour just so I can get to know you. And then we figure out what makes sense from there. And we tailor all of the packages that I do there are tailored specifically to whatever your needs are. So we can talk and figure that out. Thank you all so much for being here. Have a wonderful evening. And I'll be sending out information about my next webinar in a couple weeks for my younger students as well. All right, everybody, have a beautiful night. Bye for now.